Going into the largest Fortnite tournament since 2019,
FNCS Global Championship,
no one was predicting Mero and Cooper to take home the title. But how did a player who's repeatedly quit the game and one of the least experienced players in the lobby beat all of the world's best players? Going into the first day of the event, they needed to be top 25 in order to qualify to the finals. And whilst I was at the event, I was consistently checking who was in the qualification range using the sponsor of today's video, OperaGX. I first installed the browser because they paid me to do so, but it's actually just become my main browser ever since. Their quick import feature made it simple to import all of my data like browsing history, bookmarks, cookies from my other previous browser in seconds, which made the transition effortless. Unfortunately, the same couldn't have been said for Cooper and Mero's upper bracket day one performance. There's about 200 metal at Rumble Ruins and all of the brick is incredibly slow harvesting. You'd think that there's trees all around and this would keep them maxed woods, but this drop spot is in the center of the map, so they repeatedly had to use this material on rotation to ensure they weren't getting tagged from the many teams around them. Like the entirely grey superhero outfits they decided to wear, OperaGX also has almost unlimited customization. I added ChatGPT to my sidebar to help me with creating this video. You can also find tons of mods in the GX store, such as Hamster. You can customize the background music, keyboard sounds, opening and closing tab sounds, the theme, the color of the browser, dedicated wallpapers, and you can disable and enable individual modifications in the mods menu available from the sidebar. You can also limit how much RAM or CPU OperaGX uses, which has been super useful when creating this video since I often have a browser, multiple editing apps, and Fortnite open at the same time. Better performance was definitely needed on day one for Mero and Cooper, not only on the leaderboard, but for the entire server as it was incredibly laggy, making it really difficult for them, and really anyone else, to deal storm surge damage. Cooper's main storm surge strategy was using bushes on top of their drop spot, and in game number 3, this was used against them by Axeforce and Robab, who surprised them out of the lobby. Luckily, with OperaGX's Game Corner, new game releases will never be a surprise. You can easily see upcoming games in the release calendar, and even put notifications on for titles you're interested in. If you're interested in OperaGX, you can use my link in the description or pinned comment to download it today, and thank you very much to them for sponsoring this video. For Mero and Cooper, they were below the storm surge threshold at some point in all 5 of the games and didn't manage to have a single game into the top 10 of placement. At the end of day 1, they ended up in 28th out of 50 teams, narrowly missing out on the top 25 threshold that would have qualified them to the finals. This now meant that they had to play in the lower bracket in day number 2, their last chance to qualify to the finals.
Cooper, I love him to death, man, but he was so nervous. Like, he's actually so nervous. So I got in his head, I told him, like, bro, like, it's not that hard.
Mero and Cooper's last 2 games of day 2 only netted them 7 points in total. Thankfully, they had secured enough points in their first 3 games to make it to the top 25 and qualified to the finals. In the majority of these scuffed games, they ended up in the congested side, stuck behind so many players due to their late rotations. However, on the flip side, the one game that they placed into the top 10 was the one game they rotated extremely early and got much more of a central position on some of the earlier zones. This gave them such freer rotation. However, even this game was messy. Mero aims his rocket ram too high into the sky and gets obliterated from the lobby, and as a result, Cooper clutches up 54 additional points as a solo. This is the only game they managed to get into the top 10 across both days, and without it, they would have ended up in 31st place and not even qualified to the finals. All 10 of their games were incredibly messy, often heavily relying on solo clutching, but surely this playstyle can't win them a $4 million global championship. Yeah, this was actually Cammy, but it was too disrespectful not to include in this video. Mero and Cooper are fine. They're landing at Rumble Ruins uncontested again. One thing that I cannot state enough is how bad this drop spot truly is. I landed here in a third-party tournament with Refsguard, and one of the biggest problems we found that there were absolutely no hard mats. Cooper says it best.
Where'd I get like my hards? You don't. There's none.
So how did they play off of a drop spot with horrible materials? In this game, the zones pull to the west, so they stay inside of the POI, racking up storm surge damage for quite some time. Just before the fourth zone appears, they leave this area with 84 and 94 builds respectively, and almost zero metal. After using some builds on rotation, they position themselves below Loot Island, waiting for it to spawn. It's super important to be the first ones to land on top of the island to claim as much space as possible. However, they weren't aiming for the additional 15 points for capturing it. Instead, they were going for the plethora of additional materials and loot scattered around the island and in the vault. While one of the duo farms, the other looks for storm surge damage, and from the vault, Mero is able to get almost max metal, making up for the horrible amount in Rumble Ruins. With a max 6 zone pool, they can freely launchpad when the zone starts to move, as everyone else is rotating at this exact same moment. Plus it's laggy-ish, so no one can hit them. Their 8th zone rotate is also relatively difficult. However, they rocket ram from behind a second box to ensure they're covered from as many angles as possible, and intentionally land in the storm to make sure other teams don't land on their head using the rocket rams. They can do this since Cooper can heal the damage up they just took using the slap splashes. This game is set up almost exactly the same as their second place from game 1 of day 2, so to not choke the rotation, Mero rocket rams directly ahead on their next rotation rather than going too high into the sky and getting beamed. Their materials are starting to run dry, and if they die here in 21st, they'll only gain 10 points. Noticing they're almost out of materials, they position themselves diagonally above another team's tarp. Cooper sets up a pre-edit play and Mero jumps in. As soon as they get the knock, they make sure their back was protected so the same thing doesn't happen to them, and Cooper finishes off the second player. With the slap splashes and slurp juices they snagged from those refreshes, they played their time in the storm, using the final charge of the rocket ram to land at the front side of the circle. This is where things get messy. Mero edits a player down from on top of their tarp, picking up a second elim. Cooper has 2 builds left and runs straight into a cluster of players by himself, picking up another 2 additional elims and some materials. A desperate but required play given the amount of mats he had. He drops the low ground and picks up a crucial knock onto Poyo before getting one pumped by Sphinx. Still up above, Mero makes a beautiful mantle play to get the surprise onto Seti, resulting in a final 1v1 between him and Sphinx. But yeah, he just dies to fall damage. The pre-edit refresh they got turned their game 1 from a 10-point 21st into an 84-point second place, resulting in them currently being second with 5 games to go. However, different zone pools in game 2 changed their strategy completely. The third zone pulls to the northwest, so Cooper and Mero rotate to this hill at the edge of the jungle. From here, they have vision on all of the players rotating into the edge of the circle, yet because they're still distance from the storm, they have a relatively free rotation if they need to move to the northwest later on. If you've watched my zone priority video, you'll know this is a medium priority position. The result of this is that they're around 800 damage above the storm surge threshold when it pops. But you may have noticed they didn't go for the loot island in this game, so they can't re-harvest there for extra materials. The northwest of the map is notoriously bad for mats, and the 91 builds they have each won't be enough to last them to the end of the game, so where do they replenish these? With the northwest 5th zone pool, they make a great rotation down to the edges of these cliffs, cutting off line of sight from the few teams in the directions that they're heading. However, of course, people still shoot them in the back, resulting in them using a large amount of these materials that they previously had. Knowing they have to save as many materials as possible, they use their rocket rams in the earlier rotations to ensure they make it as deep into the game as possible. But when landing, they always ensure to create multiple boxes to play around. You may think this is counterproductive as this wastes more materials, however this stops them getting sprayed by other players in the lobby, which would waste more materials in the long run, and it gives them plenty of angles to look for elims. This is some of the secrets to their success and repeatedly allows them to get elim after elim. In the endgame, they similarly create these multiple boxes to work from and then either rocket ram or sprint to the front of low ground. Once they're almost entirely out of builds, they don't hesitate to run straight at players' walls, double spraying with their ARs to get in and pick up elims. You'd think this play looks too stupid and risky to work, but this is 2 matches in a row that this style of play has completely saved their game. It's risky, but it's the only one that they can make at that point. They make a great attempt to win the game, picking up another elim as they go, but fall short and finish this match in second place for 2 games in a row. They're on top of the leaderboards with 4 games remaining. But in my eyes, their game 3 was the point that I realized they were close to unbeatable. A 5th with 5 eliminations. With a very similar zone to the previous game, they find themselves unable to get a refresh prior to the 6th zone and are left reharvesting scraps of materials on the dead side of the circle. On rotation to the next zone, the minimal builds the duo have are stripped away by the players all around them. With 5 builds, no additional heals, and below the Storm Surge threshold, almost every duo on the planet would die here. This would be a 20-minute match for 0 points gained, but they aren't any other duo. They double pickaxe through the floor of a duo's box, and through the mess and lag, Cooper, with 0 builds and 16 HP, manages to pick up an elim onto Chari. But this refresh isn't enough. With the additional materials, Mero hunts down his duo Giras, and although he doesn't get the elim, the additional loot is refreshed and all his. This fight is a perfect example of their confidence. Chari and Giras literally ran away from them in their own builds, which set Mero and Cooper up with a playable loadout. Many people said they were lucky with where the zones pulled, and I don't necessarily disagree with this. However, this next elim is probably the most lucky one of the entire tournament. Pink is tarping on the hill above where Cooper and Mero are boxed, but through the sky flies Bryce using a rocket ram. He's heading straight for their box when another player bumps him with his own rocket ram, misdirecting his trajectory towards Pink. This knocks Pink down to the box beside Mero and Cooper, and Pink the loot llama is wiped out of the game, giving Mero and Cooper significantly more materials. Despite the fact that Mero goes down early here, they go on to place 5th with 5 eliminations and now have a commanding lead over the rest of the leaderboard. Sure, Pixie and Cheatin are close behind, they've just won the last 2 games in a row. However, Mero and Cooper are 86 points ahead of 3rd place with 3 games to go. At this point in the tournament, they'd need to choke massively for any other team to be able to overtake them. They finally pull a zone that isn't near Rumble Ruins, but similarly to their only successful game from the first 2 days, they make an early rotate through the jungle, successfully grabbing their combat cache to give them the metal that they're missing. If you've been paying attention, you can probably guess where they go to refarm their wood and brick. With the best loadout they've had all day, they hear a shield crack in a box next to them, and Mero gets an easy knock onto Moneymaker before cleaning up his duo Fanyayan as well. With a difficult hill zone coming up, they end up stuck at the bottom, clustered in amongst other players' builds with little vision and struggle to get more damage, eventually dropping below the Storm Surge threshold where they'll start to take damage. Similar to a lot of situations, most teams would probably panic here, but staying confident, Mero and Cooper jump straight into the box of PHZine, getting yet another refresh on their materials and now being above the Storm Surge threshold. The match turns messy as the zone pulls up the mountain, and with minimal materials left, Cooper makes a mistake in dropping down to Mero to split in the Medmus, meaning both players die in the storm. With 2 games remaining, the 272 points they were on meant that they had a 64% chance of winning the tournament, but in reality, they had already won. These 272 points were already more than 2nd place would end up getting after the day was over. Obviously, they did play the last few games out, but they didn't even have to play these 2 in order to take home the trophy. But their win came with quite the criticism. Many people pointed out how 5 of the 6 zones were close to their drop spot, Rumble Ruins, and in turn, 4 of the 6 loot islands spawned almost directly on top of their drop, allowing them to repeatedly be in a position to reharvest materials and have some of the best positioning to rack up the Storm Surge damage. The numbers here don't lie. Out of the 50 duos, they were ranked 14th on zone luck up until the 5th zone. The reality is that their drop spot Rumble Ruins is atrocious. They built a strategy that revolves around the advantages that it had, which are basically just the center map positioning, and capitalized on the good early zones that they had. Since they so heavily prioritized positioning and rotations over materials, Cooper was able to deal the most damage of any players in zones 4 to 8, and this surge damage and positioning repeatedly got him and Mero to endgame, where Mero was ranked number 1 in damage from zones 9 till 12. Their entire strategy heavily revolved on fragging out to get refreshed on their materials, and no other duo was even close to doing this as well as Mero and Cooper did. There were multiple situations in this tournament where they should have died. Any other player or team would have, but they were somehow able to repeatedly clutch their way out of it. With 5 FNCS wins and a global championship, many are questioning if Mero is now the GOAT of Fortnite. That's an entire other video that I'll end up covering by the end of the year, but there's no doubt he's by far the best controller player in the world. Going into the event, Cooper was probably the most underrated player in the world. Before the start of 2023, Cooper had under 10k earned, and after the global championships, he's now got 570,000. He's also just doing a great job of capturing capitalizing on the attention and grinding out content, with his Twitch growing from 17k just before the event to now over 83,000.
What does that mean for you?
I don't even know what to say about it. I mean, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to freak out.